radio crackled once, then went silent. Somewhere in the dark hills east of the valley, a man in a sand-colored robe pressed his thumb against a detonator trigger and smiled. Commander Raheel Mansour had been waiting 3 days for this helicopter. 3 days of patience, of stillness, of absolute certainty. He watched the aircraft cut through the copper sky like a needle through cloth, and he felt nothing, not excitement, not hesitation. Just the clean, cold arithmetic of a man who had decided that everyone aboard that helicopter was already dead. He lifted his radio and said 4 words to his fighters positioned along the ridge. 4 words that changed everything for one young woman who had never once imagined she would matter in a war like this. If this is your first time here, welcome. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because what happens next will stay with you long after it's over. Sarah Mitchell had a system for everything. That was what her mother always said about her back in Clarksville, Tennessee, when Sarah was 8 years old and color-coding her school notebooks with tabs she'd made herself from construction paper. Her mother called it a gift. Her father called it exhausting. Her older brother Marcus called it the reason she'd either run a corporation or join the military someday, because those were the only 2 places in the world where obsessive organization was not just tolerated, but celebrated. Marcus had been right about the military part. Sarah was 24 years old, a logistics specialist with the rank of specialist, and she had been stationed at Forward Operating Base Kestrel for 11 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. She knew the exact number because she kept a small notebook in the breast pocket of her uniform, and every morning before reveille, she marked the date at the top of a fresh page and wrote 3 things she intended to accomplish that day. It was a habit. It was also, she had come to believe, the thing that kept her sane in a place that made sanity feel like a negotiation. FOB Kestrel sat at the edge of nothing. That was the honest description. It was a cluster of prefab buildings and reinforced concrete barriers surrounded by desert on 3 sides and a mountain range on the 4th, and it existed for the sole purpose of supporting operations in a region the maps labeled as contested and the soldiers simply called the box. Sarah's job at Kestrel was to manage the flow of supply, as ammunition, medical equipment, food, water, communications, hardware, vehicle parts. She tracked every crate, every pallet, every request form. She knew which units were running low on which calibers before the units themselves did. She knew the weight limits of every resupply helicopter by model number. She knew the projected delivery window for every shipment within a 2-week radius. What she did not know and had never expected to need to know was what it felt like to watch a man bleed out 20 feet away while someone shot at her. That education was about to begin. The morning of Operation Steel Thunder started the same way all the worst days do, quietly. Sarah was in the supply depot at 0430, running an inventory check on the outgoing equipment manifest for a SEAL team extraction mission. The manifest was supposed to be finalized the night before, but Sergeant Hollis from the comms unit had submitted a last-minute request for 2 additional long-range radio sets, and Sarah had spent 40 minutes tracking down the units, verifying their battery loads, and adding them to the loadout. She was tired. Her coffee had gone cold. She had a blister on her left heel from the new boots she'd broken in wrong. Chief Petty Officer Daniel Reyes found her in the middle of retagging a crate of medical packs. He was a large man, quiet in the way that serious men are quiet, and he moved through the depot without knocking anything over, which Sarah appreciated because the depot was not a large space and most people knocked things over. He had the look of someone who slept well, regardless of circumstances, which she found both admirable and slightly unnerving. "You, Mitchell," he said. "That's me," Sarah said without looking up from the crate. "The radio sets are already logged and loaded. Tell Sergeant Hollis that next time he waits until the last minute, I'm charging him interest." Reyes almost smiled. "Almost. That's not why I'm here. We've got a situation with our 4th bird." Sarah looked up then. "Our transport helicopter," Reyes said. "The one taking the secondary team in the supply cache to the extraction point blew a hydraulic line during pre-flight. It's grounded. Maintenance says 6 hours minimum." "The operation launches in 90 minutes, Sarah said. "I know. So what's the alternative?" Reyes looked at her for a long moment. "The alternative is we redistribute the supply cache across the primary bird and take along the person who knows exactly what's in those crates and where everything is, in case something goes sideways and we need to locate equipment fast." Sarah stared at him. "You want to take me?" "Command authorized it. You'd be in a non-combat capacity seated in the rear well behind the team. The operation is a clean extraction of a high-value informant. The LZ has been surveilled for 72 hours. Intel says the area is quiet. Sarah had been in the military long enough to know that when someone told you Intel said the area was quiet, what they meant was that the area had not yet been loud in any way they could verify. But she also knew that Reyes was not the kind of man who asked for things he didn't genuinely need, and she knew that the supply cache on that helicopter contained 3 specialized trauma kits that no one on the SEAL team was trained to navigate without instruction. She had built those kits herself. She knew every compartment. "I'm not a medic," she said. "No," Reyes agreed, "but you know where the tourniquets are, and sometimes that's enough." She should have said no. She knew even in that moment that she should have said no. But she thought about the trauma kits, and she thought about some young operator bleeding in the desert because nobody could find the right compartment in the right bag fast enough. And she picked up her notebook and her pen, and she wrote 3 things at the top of that day's page. Survive. Be useful. Come home. She closed the notebook. "Let me grab my kit." The helicopter was a modified Black Hawk stripped of unnecessary weight and loaded with equipment along both interior walls. Sarah strapped herself into the rear bench seat and wedged her supply bags between her knees. She counted 6 SEALs total. Reyes, who served as team lead, a sharp-eyed operator named Kowalski, who had introduced himself by pointing at her supply bags and asking if she had extra batteries. A big, quiet man named Torres, who hadn't said anything to her at all, but had nodded once in a way that felt respectful. A younger operator named Finch, who looked about 19 and was almost certainly not 19. A communications specialist named Okafor, who spent the first 15 minutes of the flight checking and rechecking his equipment, and the team's designated sniper, a lean, still-faced man named Thompson, who sat across from Sarah and looked out the window without speaking. The pilot's name was Captain Alvarez. She had a voice like someone used to delivering bad news calmly. For 42 minutes, the flight was unremarkable. The desert slid by underneath them, pale and enormous, carved into canyons by rivers that had dried up centuries ago. Sarah kept her eyes on the supply crates and ran through her mental inventory: 2 trauma kits in the green bags, 1 in the red comms, backup gear in the black case marked with yellow tape ammunition, distributed across 3 separate containers in standardized calibers, water in collapsible pouches stacked in the netting along the left wall. She was on her 3rd mental pass through the water supply when Thompson spoke. He wasn't talking to her. He was talking to Reyes 2 seats away, and his voice was too low for her to catch the words. But she saw Reyes' expression shift just slightly, just enough, and then Reyes leaned forward and said something quietly into his headset. Then Captain Alvarez said, "We have movement on the ridge, east slope approximately 900 meters. The cabin went very still. "That ridge wasn't in the surveillance report," Finch said. "I know," Reyes said. "Alvarez, take us lower and angle south. Let's give them a harder angle." "Adjusting," Alvarez said. Sarah gripped the strap across her chest without realizing she was doing it. She felt the helicopter bank, felt the shift in altitude, and she looked at Thompson, who had stopped looking out the window and was now looking at his rifle the way a surgeon looks at a scalpel before a procedure. "Is this normal?" she heard herself ask. Torres looked at her. "No," he said. It was the first thing he'd said to her. "But it's not the worst thing that's happened either. Stay low, stay strapped." The explosion came from the right side. Sarah heard it before she felt it, a sharp percussive crack that seemed to happen inside her skull rather than outside it, and then the helicopter tilted violently to the right. And then everything was noise and pressure and the sensation of falling sideways through the air. Something hit her left shoulder hard enough to make her vision go white. She heard Alvarez shouting into the radio, heard the engines screaming a sound they were never supposed to make heard, Reyes barking orders in a voice stripped down to pure command. Then the ground came up. She didn't lose consciousness. That was the part she would think about later, the part that seemed strange in retrospect, that she stayed completely horrifyingly awake through all of it. The impact threw her forward against her straps, then sideways as the helicopter rolled, and then there was a grinding screech of metal, and the whole world went sideways and stopped. Silence. Not real silence. The kind of silence that exists inside a very loud space where everything suddenly stopped. Then someone was coughing. Then someone else was swearing with great focus and energy. Then Reyes's voice, "Sound off! Sound off right now!" One by one, the SEALs answered. Kowalski, Torres, Okafor, Finch. Thompson slower, his voice strained. Sarah tried to speak and discovered that her voice was working fine. "Mitchell, I'm here." "Alvarez," Reyes said. Silence from the cockpit. "Alvarez," he said again louder. The pilot's voice came back thin and careful. "I'm here, left leg. Can't move it." Sarah was already unclipping her harness. She didn't decide to do it consciously. Her hands just moved, and then she was crouching in the tilted interior of the crashed helicopter, pulling her supply bags free from where they'd wedged against the frame. Her shoulder screamed at her. She ignored it. "I need to get to the pilot," she said. "Mitchell, wait for..." "She's injured, and she can't move her leg." "I have the trauma kit." Sarah was already moving toward the cockpit, bent low, stepping over the equipment that had shifted in the crash. "Someone tell me when it's clear to open the door." Reyes made a sound that was not quite a word, but communicated acceptance. "Torres, cover the left side. Kowalski, right. Finch, get that comms unit working. We need to establish contact." Sarah pushed through to the cockpit. Captain Alvarez was a compact woman in her mid-30s, with dark hair and a very straight spine, and she was sitting with her teeth clenched, and both hands on the controls, as though she might still fly this aircraft out of the situation by sheer discipline. Her left leg was pinned at an angle that made Sarah's stomach clench. "It's not broken, sir," Alvarez said immediately, the way someone says something they've been repeating to themselves. "I don't think it's broken. It's pinned." "Let me see," Sarah said. "You're not a medic." "I know, but what's here." Sarah crouched and opened the red trauma kit. Her hands were steady. She didn't know why they were steady. "Talk to me. Tell me where it hurts." "Where it doesn't hurt would be a shorter conversation," Alvarez said. But she talked, and Sarah listened, and she moved carefully. And when she found the source of the pin, a collapsed piece of the instrument panel frame that had bent inward during the roll, she called back to Torres, who was the largest person available. And he came, and they worked the frame back together until Alvarez could pull free. The pilot's leg was bruised badly, and there was a deep laceration along the shin, but the bone held. "Can you walk?" Sarah asked. "I can move," Alvarez said. "That's enough." The first shots came before they'd finished securing the pilot. Sarah heard them as a sound she'd heard before, only on training ranges, and in the specific genre of movies where the sound designers tried too hard, a sharp, distant cracking that her brain spent about 1 full second trying to categorize before her body reacted by pulling itself flat against the floor of the cockpit. "Contact right," Kowalski's voice, sharp and professional. 200 meters rocky outcrop, at least 4 shooters. "Thompson, get to elevation," Reyes ordered. "Already moving," Thompson called back. Sarah raised her head enough to see through the cracked cockpit glass. She could see the desert in front of her bow and still, and then she saw puffs of dust kicking up from the ground in patterns that her brain mapped with horrible clarity as bullets landing. Very close bullets. Getting closer. "Mitchell," Reyes said, appearing at the cockpit entrance. His voice was entirely level, which she found both reassuring and alarming. "Are you capable of functioning right now?" She looked at him. "Yes." "Good. I need you to move every supply bag out of the main compartment and stack them along the left wall low. That creates a barrier and gives us access to the ammunition." "Can you do that?" "Yes." "Do it fast." She did it fast. For the next 12 minutes, Sarah Mitchell moved supply crates while bullets snapped through the air around a crashed helicopter in the middle of the desert. She did not think about what the bullets meant. She thought only about weight size, which crate went where, which bags needed to stay accessible. She thought about the system. The system kept her moving. The system kept her from stopping to consider what would happen if a bullet stopped her. Kowalski fell back to the left side of the helicopter, firing in controlled bursts. Finch was on the radio, voice tight but steady, relaying their coordinates to command. Okafor had taken a fragment of something across the back of his left hand and was working through it with the focused efficiency of someone who had decided pain was optional information. "Mitchell," Kowalski's voice. "I need the 556 left crate marked with blue tape." Sarah found it. She dragged it across the floor and pushed it toward him. "Good," he said without looking at her. He was already reloading. Thompson had found a position behind a rocky formation, 20 meters from the helicopter, and for a while his rifle answered every burst of enemy fire with a single deliberate shot. Sarah could track the rhythm of the battle partly by the sound of his rifle because when Thompson shot, the enemy fire usually paused for a moment, and in those pauses the other SEALs moved and adjusted. Then the rhythm changed. She heard Thompson's rifle fire twice in quick succession, which was not his pattern. Then she heard him make a sound, not a word, not a scream, just a sound. And then she heard Reyes say, "Thompson is down, Finch, get to him." Finch went. Sarah watched him go low and fast, moving with a kind of controlled recklessness that she understood was training, that was years of doing the dangerous thing correctly. He reached Thompson, and she saw them exchange words she couldn't hear over the noise. And then Finch was moving back, pulling Thompson with one arm, and he was calling out as he moved. "Through and through, on the left side, he's moving, but he's out of the fight." "Copy," Reyes said. He was at the right wall of the helicopter, firing steadily. "Kowalski, can you pick up the long gun?" "Negative, I've got the primary contact suppressed. I break off, they flank us on the right." There was a pause. A real pause, not a tactical pause. The kind of pause that exists when a leader runs the numbers and finds the numbers don't add up. Sarah looked at Thompson's rifle where it had been set against the rocky formation. She looked at it the way you look at something that you know you shouldn't touch, that you know is beyond your experience, that you know exists in a category labeled not for you. She had fired an M4 during basic. She had done one afternoon of range familiarization on a designated marksman rifle 18 months ago, mostly because it was offered, and she was the kind of person who took things when they were offered. She was not a sniper. She was not trained for this. She was a logistics specialist with a system for everything, and there was no system for what was happening. Reyes was looking at her. She didn't know when he had started looking at her. She met his eyes, and something passed between them that wasn't a conversation, but contained everything a conversation would have covered, and she heard herself say, "I've fired a long rifle before. I know the basics." Reyes stared at her for exactly 2 seconds. "One of you is going to tell me I'm out of my mind." "Man," Sarah said. "You're out of your mind," Torres said from across the compartment without hesitation. "Okay," Sarah said. "Tell me what to do." Reyes made a decision. She could see it happen. "Get to Thompson's position. He'll talk you through the fundamentals. Kowalski will cover your move. You go low and you go fast and you do not stop for anything." "Understood." "Understood. When you get there, Thompson tells you what to do. You do exactly what he says, nothing more." "Okay." "Mitchell." She looked at him. "You don't have to do this," he said. And he meant it. She could tell he meant it. "There are other options." "No, there aren't," she said. "You just did the math and there aren't." Reyes looked at her for one more second. Then he said, "Kowalski, cover her. Mitchell, go." She went. 20 meters had never been so long. The ground was uneven, and she hit it wrong twice and caught herself and kept moving, and she could feel the impacts of bullets landing near her as she crossed the open space, not in her body, but in the ground beneath her hands and feet, small shocks transmitting upward. She didn't look at where they were coming from. She looked only at Thompson, who was propped against the rock, with one arm pressed to his left side and his eyes absolutely clear and focused on her. She dropped down beside him. "I told them you were out of your mind," Thompson said. "Torres already said that," Sarah said, breathing hard. "Torres is right." Thompson coughed, once controlled it. "But here you are, so listen carefully because I'm only going to say this once." She listened. He told her about the scope, about breathing, about the specific geometry of finding stillness inside chaos. He told her about trigger pull and language stripped of all decoration, not how it felt, not what it meant, just the mechanics of it, the sequence, the timing. He told her about wind and distance, using numbers she could hold in her head without a calculator. His voice was the most level thing in the world. She fixed her eyes on his face and absorbed everything he said, and then she turned to the rifle. It was heavier than she expected, or maybe she was weaker than she thought. Her hands found the grip and the stock, and she settled into the position Thompson described, adjusting twice until something in the angle of her body shifted into something that felt, if not right, then at least workable. She found the scope. The world through the scope was a different world, narrow, bright, relentless in its detail. She saw rocks. She saw desert floor. She swept slowly the way Thompson had told her, slow and patient. She found the rocky outcrop 200 meters out. She saw movement behind it. She controlled her breathing. In slowly, out slowly, in, out. Her finger rested against the trigger guard, not the trigger. Not yet. She found the crosshairs. She found the target. Behind her, she could hear the battle, Kowalski's rifle, Reyes calling adjustments, Finch working on Thompson's wound, the enemy fire that had grown louder in the last 2 minutes as the fighters pressed the advantage of a sniper position gone silent. She heard Reyes say, "We need that position." She heard Thompson say very quietly from 6 inches away, "Breathe out. When the crosshairs settle, you'll know." She breathed out. The crosshairs settled. She knew. Her finger moved to the trigger, and everything before that moment, the coffee gone cold, the blister on her heel, the color-coded notebooks, the 24 years of being the person who counted bullets rather than fired them, all of it compressed into a single point of absolute terrifying clarity. She did not think. She was done thinking. She pulled the trigger. The shot cracked across the desert like a door being slammed shut on the world before. Sarah didn't know if she'd hit anything. She didn't know what she expected to feel, some kind of confirmation, some signal from the universe that what she'd just done had mattered. But the scope showed only dust and rock, and the echo of the shot rolled away across the valley, and then there was nothing. Just the sound of her own breathing, which was not as controlled as she wanted it to be. Then the enemy fire from the left outcrop stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. Thompson was watching her face. "You hit," he said. Simple, factual. The way a man confirms a weather report. Sarah said nothing. She was already scanning the scope again, the way he'd shown her, slow and deliberate, moving right to left, finding the next position, because Thompson had told her that the worst thing a sniper does is stay fixed on the last shot when the next threat is already moving. She moved the scope. She found 2 figures repositioning along the base of the ridge, low and fast, trying to flank the helicopter from the south. "2 movers south base," she said. Her voice surprised her. It was steady. "Kowalski," Thompson called loud enough to carry. "2 coming south." "I see them," Kowalski called back. "Mitchell, can you take the one on the left? He's behind my angle." Sarah found the figure on the left in the scope. He was moving in short bursts, rock to rock, the way someone trained moves, not panicking, not rushing, calculating. She matched his pattern in her mind, tracking the gaps between his movements. "Tell me when," she said. When, Kowalski said immediately. She fired. The figure stopped moving. Kowalski's rifle answered the one on the right, and then for 10 seconds there was nothing but the sound of the desert and the muffled sound of Torres and Reyes on the other side of the helicopter, still holding the primary position, and the very controlled sound of Thompson breathing beside her, monitoring his own wound with the same focused detachment he brought to everything else. "You're doing it," Thompson said. Not encouragement, just observation delivered in the same register as everything else, he said. "Don't," Sarah said. "Don't what?" "Don't tell me I'm doing spell. I can't think about what I'm doing or I'll stop being able to do it." Thompson was quiet for a moment. Then, "Fair enough." From behind the helicopter, Reyes's voice came tight and urgent. "We've got a third element. High ground northeast. They're repositioning for an elevated angle. Someone find them." Sarah was already moving the scope northeast. The high ground Reyes was describing was a ridge that sat above the crash site at an angle that would, if the fighters got there and established a position, make the helicopter impossible to defend. She understood the geometry of it the same way she understood warehouse layouts and supply chain logistics. It was just space, and things moved through space according to rules, and if you understood the rules, you could see what was coming before it arrived. She found them. 3 fighters already halfway up the northeast ridge, moving faster than they should have been, clearly under orders to get to the high ground before the people below could react. 3 on the northeast ridge," she called out. "Halfway up, moving fast." "Can you reach them?" Reyes called. Sarah did the math Thompson had given her. Distance, elevation, change, wind from the west at roughly 8 to 10 miles per hour based on the way the dust was moving on the flat ground below. She adjusted the scope, found the lead figure, breathed. "Yes," she said. "Then we need all 3. She didn't answer that. She just went to work. The first shot landed, and the lead figure went down, and the 2 behind him stopped. That was the worst thing they could have done, stopped on an open slope with a sniper who now had them in frame. Sarah felt something cold and mechanical move through her, a part of her that she hadn't known existed before this morning, and she cycled the bolt and found the second figure and fired before he could get moving again. 2. The third one broke, sprinting back the way he'd come, angling for the rocks. She tracked him, accounting for the movement, and she remembered what Thompson had said about moving targets. You don't aim at where they are, you aim at where they're going to be. She led him by what her instinct said was the right margin, and she pulled the trigger, and he stopped. She held the position scanning, no movement on the northeast ridge. Behind her, she heard Torres say very quietly, "Dear God." Reyes didn't offer commentary. He didn't have time. "Finch, what's our comm status?" "I've got a signal," Finch called back. His voice carried a current of excitement underneath the professionalism. "I've got QRF on the line. They're 35 minutes out. Tell them we need medical for Thompson and we need fire support on the Eastern Valley approach. Tell them we have a sniper element holding the ridge positions." A pause from Finch. "Do we a sniper element?" "Tell them what I told you to tell them," Reyes said. 35 minutes. Sarah let that number settle into her body. It felt both very short and very long simultaneously, the way important numbers always do. She kept the scope up. She kept scanning. Her shoulder had gone from screaming to a kind of deep, steady ache that she decided to classify as background noise. Her right hand was cramped from the grip. She relaxed her fingers deliberately one by one the way Thompson had told her, because tension in the hand travels to the trigger, and tension in the trigger kills accuracy. Finch came back. "QRF copies. They're relaying to command. Command wants a body count for the enemy." "Tell command to get here first," Reyes said. "We'll do paperwork later." That almost made Sarah laugh. She didn't laugh. She kept the scope up. It was Torres who noticed the new vehicle before anyone else did. He was covering the southern approach from a position at the helicopter's tail, and he'd been doing it quietly and systematically for the past several minutes. And then he said in a voice that managed to be both loud and controlled, "Vehicle, South Road, it's moving fast and it's not ours." Sarah swung the scope south. The vehicle was a pickup truck, the kind that exists in large numbers in every conflict zone in the world, and it was moving at speed along a track that ran parallel to the valley floor. And there were figures in the truck bed, and one of those figures was holding something that Sarah's brain identified and then refused to fully accept, because the thing it was identifying was a shoulder-mounted rocket-propelled grenade launcher, and the truck was angled directly at the helicopter. "RPG on the truck," she said. The words came out flat because she didn't have room for anything else. "South approach, moving fast." "Range," Reyes asked. She did the math. 32340, coming down. "Can you hit the shooter?" The truck was moving fast on uneven ground, which meant the shooter in the truck bed was also moving, bouncing with the terrain, trying to keep his balance while preparing to fire. It was not a static shot. It was nothing like a static shot. It was the kind of shot that she had absolutely no training for, that required years of experience she didn't have, and it needed to happen in the next 15 to 20 seconds, or the man with the RPG was going to have a range and angle he was comfortable with, and then the helicopter and everyone sheltering behind it was going to stop existing. "I don't know," she said. It was the first honest thing she'd said since picking up the rifle. Thompson said quietly, "You've been leading moving targets for the last 10 minutes. Those were people on foot. The principle is the same. The truck is moving at a constant speed on a straight track. It's actually easier than a person because it can't change direction as fast. Lead it by the length of the vehicle, adjust for the bounce." He coughed. "You have time, breathe." She breathed. She found the truck in the scope, found the figure in the truck bed who was now raising the launcher to his shoulder, and she understood that she was out of time for philosophy about this. And so she stopped having philosophy about it and focused entirely on the geometry. The truck was moving left to right across her angle. Constant speed, straight track. She led the figure by what her instinct and Thompson's instructions told her was right. She accounted for the bounce by picking the moment when the truck hit a flat section of track. She breathed out and she fired. The launcher dropped. The figure dropped with it. The truck swerved violently. Whoever was driving had felt the shot or seen what happened, and then it stopped moving, and then after a moment it began reversing back down the track the way it had come. Sarah let out a breath that seemed to contain everything she'd been holding in her chest for the past hour. Her hands were shaking. She noticed this the way you notice weather as a fact about the current conditions, not something to be alarmed by. "Mitchell," Reyes said from behind the helicopter. "Yeah," she said. "Good shot." She didn't respond to that. She went back to scanning. Finch's voice came about 4 minutes later, and the note in it was different from everything that had come before. "Command has eyes on our position via drone feed. They're routing 2 additional birds to our location. Adjusted ETA is now 22 minutes. He paused. They're also asking who's running the sniper position. Reyes looked towards Sarah's position. She couldn't see him from where she was, but she felt the weight of it. "Tell them it's covered," he said. Finch relayed the message. A pause on the line. "Then command wants a name." Reyes was quiet for 2 seconds. "Specialist Sarah Mitchell. Logistics." The longest silence yet from the radio. Then Finch with something that might have been laughter or might have been something else. "Copy that." The next 12 minutes were not quiet, but they were not the storm of the first contact either. The enemy had lost their organized approach. The sniper fire from an unexpected position had disrupted whatever plan they'd come in with, and now they were adjusting, which meant they were slower, more cautious, less coordinated. Sarah picked off 2 more fighters who tried to advance along the eastern tree line. She missed once on a shot she shouldn't have attempted at that angle, and the miss felt different from the hits. It sat heavier, even though the hit shots were the ones that should have weighed something. Thompson had started to look pale. Finch had done a solid job with the wound, but losing blood in the desert heat was its own kind of problem. He was still talking to her in short bursts, still watching, still coaching in that stripped-down technical language he used, but his sentences were getting further apart. "You doing okay?" she asked him between scans. "I'm doing fine," he said. "I've had worse." That's not a comforting statement. Wasn't supposed to be comforting. Was supposed to be true. He shifted slightly, settling his back more firmly against the rock. "You've been on the scope for 90 minutes. Your eye is going to start lying to you. Blink at both eyes, then go back. Do it every few minutes." She did it. He was right. The second she closed both eyes for a few seconds and then returned to the scope, the image sharpened in a way she hadn't realized it had been drifting. "How do you know when to trust it and when to know it's lying?" she asked. "Experience," Thompson said. "That's not helpful." "No," he agreed, "but it's what I've got." She went back to scanning. Kowalski had shifted positions twice to stay ahead of enemy attempts to outflank from the north, and Torres had moved south to manage an approach from that direction, and Reyes was everywhere, checking positions, relaying information to command, managing Okafor's hand wound, keeping the overall picture of the battle in his head, and adjusting everyone within it like a man running a very high-stakes logistics operation. Sarah recognized it as such. She understood what he was doing because it was at its core what she did, tracking multiple moving components and making sure they were in the right positions relative to each other at all times. He was just doing it with people and bullets instead of crates and manifests. The big twist came without warning, as the important ones always do. Okafor on the radio said, "Command is updating. The high-value informant we were extracting, the one the whole operation was built around command, is saying he may not be at the original extraction point." Reyes stopped moving. "Say again." "The informant's handler lost comms with him 40 minutes ago. Could be compromised, could be he moved. Either way, command doesn't have a confirmed location." Reyes was silent for 4 full seconds. Sarah at the sniper position heard every word of this and felt the implications arrange themselves with horrible clarity. The entire operation, the helicopter, the crash, the fight, all of it had been predicated on reaching a specific location to extract a specific person. And now command was saying that person might not be there, which meant either this had all been for nothing, or it meant something worse, that the informant's cover had been blown before the operation launched, and someone with that knowledge had decided to put a helicopter with a SEAL team on an intercept course with an enemy force that had been waiting for it. "Were we set up?" she heard herself ask. Thompson looked at her. "The ridge wasn't in the surveillance report," she said. "You knew that. Reyes knew that. The fighters were already positioned before we got there, and the truck with the RPG came from the south approach, which means it was staged before we crashed. That kind of positioning takes time. It takes foreknowledge." She kept the scope up because she couldn't afford to put it down, but she was talking now, and the words were coming because they were the thing her mind produced when it was working hard on a problem. "Were we set up?" Reyes from the helicopter said in a careful voice, "Mitchell, I'm not panicking," she said. "I'm asking a question." He was quiet for 3 seconds. "That question is above my pay grade in the field. Right now, my pay grade is keeping everyone alive until those helicopters arrive." "How much time?" Finch checked. 11 minutes. 11 minutes, Sarah breathed. 11 minutes was possible. 11 minutes was a number she could hold. She went back to scanning, and she held the number, and she scanned. 3 minutes later, the largest group yet appeared on the western approach. She saw them before anyone else did because she was the one with the scope. 8 fighters moving in a disciplined spread using the terrain well clearly, with more military training than the earlier groups. They were moving with purpose and they were moving toward the helicopter, and they were not trying to hide what they were doing because they had enough people that concealment was no longer their strategy. Their strategy was weight of numbers. 8 on the western approach, she said. These are different. They're moving like they've done this before. Copy, Reyes said. His voice didn't change, but she heard something shift underneath it. Not fear, but the recalibration of a man who has just been told the math got harder. All positions, western threat incoming. Kowalski, I need you to break the north hold and redirect west. Torres, hold south, but start angling. Finch, stay on the radio. I can't suppress 8 in a spread with this rifle, Sarah said. Not at this speed. They know what they're doing. They're moving, so I can only get one before the others take cover and pin our position. I know, Reyes said. Take the one you can get and let Kowalski and I manage the rest. We need 3 more minutes, Mitchell. Can you hold them for 3 minutes? 3 minutes from now, the QRF aircraft would be 8 minutes out. 3 minutes of holding against 8 trained fighters with a rifle she'd never qualified on a wounded operator beside her and hands that had been shaking for the last 20 minutes. Yes, she said. She put the crosshairs on the lead fighter and she breathed and she took the shot. The shot hit. The spread broke. Exactly as she'd predicted, the remaining 7 went immediately to ground, some behind rocks, 2 behind a shallow depression in the terrain. 1 flattened on the open ground, which meant he was the one who'd been trained the least, because the open ground was not cover. She found him in the scope and fired before he could determine that for himself. 6 fighters pinned trying to work out where the shots were coming from. Kowalski and Reyes opened up on their positions from the helicopter side, and the 6 fighters now had pressure from 2 directions, which meant they couldn't move without exposing themselves to at least one of the 2 threats. They went still, a stalemate, but a stalemate that required Sarah to keep the scope up and keep the pressure on, because the moment she let it drop, they'd move. Her eye was lying to her again. She blinked both eyes. She went back. Her finger hurt. She hadn't noticed that before. The trigger finger on her right hand was cramped in a way that made the simple act of curling it feel like a negotiation. She worked through it. The ache in her shoulder had passed through pain and was now simply a constant presence, like a sound you've heard for so long, you've stopped registering it consciously. Thompson said very quietly, "You hear that?" She heard it, a distant percussion coming from the south and east. Then the radio in Finch's hand burst with chatter, and Finch said, his voice breaking slightly at the edges with something that wasn't quite relief but was everything leading up to it. QRF is 6 minutes out. They've got the drone feed. They have a full picture of the Western group. They're calling in fire support. 2 of the pinned Western fighters, apparently with a radio of their own and a better awareness of their situation than their position suggested, broke from their cover and ran. Sarah tracked the first and fired. The second disappeared into a gully before she could cycle. The remaining 4 fighters didn't break. They went to ground and stayed there, which was a tactical decision she respected even as she held the scope on their positions and watched for movement. The fire support came in the form of a single precision strike from an aircraft she couldn't see, and then there was no more Western problem. After that, there was a silence that was different from all the previous silences. Sarah kept the scope up for 2 more minutes. She scanned every quadrant Thompson had taught her. She found nothing. She scanned it again. Still nothing. The desert was, for the first time since the helicopter had gone down, simply a desert. She lowered the rifle. Her arms dropped to her sides, and she held that position for a moment, not moving, just letting gravity have what it had been asking for the past 2 hours. Then she set the rifle down carefully on the rock beside Thompson, because it wasn't hers, because it would always be his. Thompson looked at her face. "How are you doing?" he asked. It was the first time in 2 hours that anyone had asked her that. She wasn't sure what to do with it. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "Ask me when the helicopters land." "Fair answer," Thompson said. She looked at her hands. They were still. She hadn't expected that. After everything, after the shaking and the cramping and the weight of what they'd been doing, they were resting in her lap completely still, and she stared at them for a long moment, as though they belonged to someone she was meeting for the first time. Behind her, she heard Reyes organizing the team for the incoming aircraft. heard him talk to Okafor about the hand, heard him check. Torres heard him relay final coordinates to Finch. His voice was the same voice it had been at the beginning, methodical, stripped of everything that didn't serve the immediate task, anchored completely in the present. Then he walked to where she was sitting beside Thompson and crouched down. He didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at the rifle on the rock, and he looked at the positions she'd been engaging, and he did the math the way she knew he'd been doing math all morning. "How many rounds do you have left?" he asked. She checked the magazine. 4. He nodded slowly. QRF's going to land in that flat space north of us. We move Thompson first, then Alvarez. You stay with the rifle until we're loaded. Okay, she said. Mitchell. She looked at him. Something crossed his face that wasn't quite what she expected from him. Not sentiment. Reyes didn't do sentiment in the field. But there was a weight to the way he looked at her, a recognition, the look of a man who has revised his understanding of something important. Okay, he said again, and it was not the same word this time. It meant something else entirely, and she understood what it meant, and she didn't know what to do with it except to nod. She picked the rifle back up. She held the last 4 rounds, and she held the position, and she listened to the sound of the helicopters getting louder and louder in the sky above the desert, and she kept her eyes open, and she kept watch over every person who had made it this far. Because that was the job, and the job was the only thing her mind had room for right now. And the helicopters came. The helicopters came in low and fast, the way military aircraft always do when the people on the ground have been waiting too long, and the sound of them was the best sound Sarah Mitchell had ever heard in her life. She didn't lower the rifle until the first boot hit the ground. That was the rule she'd made for herself in the last 4 minutes of waiting, and she held to it the way she'd held to every system she'd ever built, completely without negotiation. The QRF medic reached Thompson first. He was a compact, fast-moving man named Bauer, who communicated almost entirely in short declarative statements and moved around Thompson's wound with the focused efficiency of someone who had done this specific thing many times in many different locations. He took one look at the entry and exit points, asked Thompson 2 questions, got 2 answers, and started working. Thompson looked at Sarah while Bauer worked. Go, he said. You're done here. I know, she said. But she didn't move for another 3 seconds. She was looking at the rifle on the rock beside him, and she was thinking about something she couldn't fully articulate yet. Something that lived in the space between who she had been at 4:30 that morning and whoever was standing here now with 4 unused rounds and a cramped trigger finger. She set the rifle down. She walked away. Reyes was at the second helicopter speaking with the QRF commander, a broad-shouldered lieutenant colonel named Garrett, who had the kind of face that seemed permanently in the process of making a decision. Garrett was holding a tablet and looking at drone imagery, and whatever was on that tablet was making his expression tighten at the edges in a way that Sarah, even from 15 feet away, recognized as controlled alarm. She was close enough to hear when Garrett said, "We're looking at a force of approximately 40 personnel total. You had 6 people and a logistics specialist holding them for 93 minutes. Reyes said nothing. Command wants a full debrief the moment your wheels down at Kestrel, Garrett said. There are questions about the intelligence picture for this operation. Reyes looked at Garrett steadily. There should be, he said. Garrett looked at him. What does that mean? It means the ridge position wasn't in the surveillance report. It means the RPG vehicle was staged south of our LZ before we were shot down. It means someone knew we were coming before we got there. Reyes's voice was even, each word placed carefully. It means the debrief needs to include a conversation about where the intelligence for this operation came from and who had access to the operational timeline. Garrett was quiet for 4 seconds. He looked at the tablet. He looked back at Reyes. That's a significant allegation. It's an observation, Reyes said. The allegation is someone else's job. Sarah was standing still listening, and she felt the shape of what Reyes was saying settle around her like something physical. She had asked the same question from the sniper position 90 minutes ago, half-formed and raw. Hearing Reyes say it now, stripped of emotion, presented as a sequence of observable facts, made it real in a different way. They hadn't just been shot down, they'd been delivered. Bauer and another medic loaded Thompson onto a stretcher and moved him to the first helicopter. Captain Alvarez was already aboard her, leg wrapped, and elevated her face, carrying the particular expression of a pilot who has been separated from her aircraft and is processing her feelings about it with great internal discipline. Kowalski and Torres were checking and storing their weapons, moving through the post-operation sequence with the practiced automaticity of men whose bodies knew the procedure even when their minds were still elsewhere. Finch found Sarah standing at the edge of the activity and fell into step beside her. "You good?" he asked. "You're the second person to ask me that today," she said. "Is that bad?" "No, I just don't have a better answer than I did the first time." She looked at him. He was 23, she'd learned during the flight, in which made him a year younger than her, though nothing about the last 2 hours had felt like the experience of someone younger than her. "Are you good?" Finch considered this with what seemed like genuine seriousness. "I think I'm going to be good," he said. "Sometime in the next couple of days, I'll probably be good. Right now, I'm running on adrenaline and the specific kind of relief that feels exactly like panic." "That's accurate," Sarah said. "That's exactly what this is." They loaded into the helicopter. The flight back to FOB Kestrel took 40 minutes, and Sarah spent most of it looking at her hands. Not because they were doing anything interesting, they were resting in her lap, still now, finally and genuinely still, but because she didn't have anywhere else to look that didn't involve processing something she wasn't ready to process. The other people in the aircraft were doing their own versions of the same thing. Kowalski had his eyes closed. Torres was staring at the ceiling. Okafor had his bandaged hand rested on his knee and was doing something that might have been counting breaths. Reyes was the only one who seemed continuous with himself, still present, still evaluating, watching the others with the quiet attention of a man who considered the welfare of his people to be an operational responsibility, even in the aftermath. He caught Sarah looking at him and held her gaze for a moment. "What happens when we land?" she asked. "Debrief, medical screening, then command takes over and we answer questions for a while." "What kind of questions?" "The kind they ask when an operation goes wrong in ways that don't fit the intelligence picture." She held that. "Do you think we were set up not as an observation?" "What do you actually think?" Reyes looked at her for a long moment. The helicopter noise made the silence feel somehow louder. "I think the enemy knew our flight path," he said finally. "I think the ambush was too organized for something assembled in response to our launch. I think someone somewhere in the operational chain fed information to the wrong people." He paused. "Whether that was intentional or a security failure, I don't know. That's what the debrief is for. And the informant, the person we were supposed to extract." Reyes looked at the floor of the aircraft. "I don't know," he said. "I genuinely don't know." That answer was worse than any of the alternatives, and Sarah sat with it for the rest of the flight. FOB Kestrel looked exactly the same as it had at 4:30 that morning, which felt impossible. The same barriers, the same prefab buildings, the same dust in the air that tasted like mineral and heat. Sarah stepped off the helicopter and felt the ground under her feet, and something in her body registered the solid fact of the base around her as an instruction to release something it had been holding very tightly for a very long time. She didn't cry. She'd been worried she would, and she didn't, and she was relieved about that in a way that she recognized was probably not the most emotionally healthy response, but was honest. Thompson was taken directly to the medical unit. Alvarez was taken to the same place, her shin needing proper imaging and treatment. The rest of the team moved through the post-operation intake process, and Sarah moved through it with them because no one told her not to, and because her name was apparently now on documentation that described her as a participating element in a combat operation, which was a sentence she could not have imagined writing in her notebook that morning. The medical screening was brief. The doctor, a tired-looking major named Chen, examined her shoulder, determined it was badly bruised but not structurally damaged. Rapid asked her 3 questions about her mental state in the careful language of someone trained to identify acute stress responses, and gave her water and something to eat. "You're going to feel this tomorrow," he said. "I already feel it today," she said. "Tomorrow will be worse," he said pleasantly. "Come back if the pain increases significantly or you have trouble sleeping." She ate, she drank the water. She sat in the small waiting area of the medical unit, and she thought about the 3 things she had written in her notebook that morning: survive, be useful. Come home, and she thought about the fact that she had done all 3 of them technically, and that this should feel like a more complete thing than it currently felt. The debrief started 90 minutes after landing. The room was a reinforced conference space in the operations building, and the people in it included Reyes Kowalski, Torres Finch Okafor, and Sarah, along with Lieutenant Colonel Garrett. A military intelligence officer named Colonel Price, who had the affect of someone permanently existing at slightly below room temperature, and a woman in civilian clothing who introduced herself only as Walsh, and who asked questions with the practiced neutrality of someone whose job was to gather information without revealing what she intended to do with it. Walsh was the one who said it first directly and without preamble. "We have a significant intelligence failure to account for. The surveillance of the LZ was conducted over 72 hours and showed no hostile positioning on the eastern ridge. The hostile positioning that engaged your team was consistent with a pre-established ambush prepared no less than 4 to 6 hours before the operation launched. This means the operational timeline was compromised." She looked around the room. "What we need to understand is where that compromise occurred." Price added, "The informant's last confirmed contact with his handler was 14 hours before the operation launched. His handler reported nothing unusual. The informant has not been located." "He's dead," Reyes said. The room went quiet. "That's not confirmed," Price said. "The operation was built around extracting him. The enemy knew the operation was coming. If they knew the operation was coming, they knew why it was coming. If they knew why it was coming, they had time to act on that information before we launched." Reyes's voice was level and relentless. "He's dead, and someone either gave that information to the enemy or was careless enough that the enemy found it themselves." Walsh wrote something on her notepad. "Chief Petty Officer Reyes, we are not drawing conclusions at this stage." "I'm not drawing conclusion," Reyes said. "I'm giving you a logical sequence. Drawing conclusions is your job." Walsh looked at him for a moment. Then she moved on. "Specialist Mitchell." Sarah looked up. "You were added to this operation under non-standard circumstances due to equipment failure. Can you walk us through your actions from the point of the crash forward?" Sarah walked them through it. She did it the way she did everything, systematically in sequence, without embellishment, with specific details where specific details were available. She described moving the supply crates. She described reaching the pilot. She described the moment she looked at Thompson's rifle and understood what the math required. She described each shot as accurately as she could, which meant describing the target, the distance, her assessment of the situation, and the outcome. When she finished, the room was quiet in a particular way. Price said, "You have no formal sniper training." "No," Sarah said. "One afternoon of familiarization on a designated marksman rifle 18 months ago." "Yes." "And you neutralize," he looked at his notes, "11 confirmed targets over the course of 93 minutes, including a moving target with an RPG launcher while holding the sniper position alone after the primary operator was wounded." Sarah didn't answer because there was nothing in that statement that was a question. Price looked at Reyes. "Is her account consistent with what you observed?" Reyes looked at Sarah for a moment before answering. "It's consistent," he said, "and it's also incomplete because it doesn't account for the part where she identified the northeastern flanking element before anyone else saw it, and it doesn't account for the fact that when I gave her the option not to take the sniper position, she assessed the tactical situation accurately and made the correct call without hesitation." He paused. "Her account doesn't account for any of that because she's describing facts and leaving out the judgment. But the judgment is what kept my team alive." Something happened in Sarah's chest at that, a tightening and then a release like a knot being worked loose by patient hands. Walsh wrote something more on her notepad. Then the door to the conference room opened, and the person who came through it changed the entire character of the room immediately. He was a Colonel Fullbird, and he had the particular energy of a man who has just come from a conversation that did not go the way he intended. His name was Halstead, and Sarah had never met him, but she saw the way Garrett straightened slightly, and the way Price's careful neutrality became slightly more careful, and she understood that Halstead was the kind of senior officer whose arrival at a debrief meant the debrief had just become something else. "I need the room," Halstead said. "All civilians and non-operations personnel, please step out." Walsh looked at him. "Colonel, this debrief is—" "I'm aware of what it is," Halstead said. "I'm telling you to step out." Walsh left. The civilian designation apparently extended to her, regardless of what her actual role was, which told Sarah something about the relative power structures in the room. Sarah began to stand. "Mitchell stays," Reyes said. Halstead looked at Reyes. Then he looked at Sarah. Then, in a decision that seemed to involve a private calculation, he said, "Fine. Everyone else out." Garrett, Price, and 2 junior staff left. The room contracted to Halstead, Reyes, Kowalski, Torres, Finch, Okafor, and Sarah. Halstead sat down at the head of the table. He put both hands flat on the surface, and he looked at Reyes with the directness of a man who has decided that indirection is no longer serving his purposes. The informant is confirmed dead, he said. No one in the room made a sound. He was found 4 hours ago, 11 kilometers from the extraction point. He'd been moved post-mortem. The positioning was deliberate. The enemy wanted us to find him. Halstead's voice carried no inflection beyond the facts. The intelligence compromise is being investigated at a level above this installation. What I need to tell you is that there was a secondary element to this operation that was not included in your briefing. Reyes said very carefully, "What secondary element?" The informant was carrying something when he was extracted by the enemy. Documents, specifically a hard copy of a network map, names locations, safe houses, contact structures for an intelligence asset network that has been operational in this region for 7 years. If that document reaches its intended destination, the entire network burns. Halstead looked at him. 32 people. The weight of that number settled into the room like something physical. "Where is the document now?" Reyes asked. "We believe it's still in the operational area. The enemy force that engaged you was not the final destination, they were a transport element. The document was supposed to move through them to a courier who would take it out of the region. Our drone feed captured vehicle movement in the valley approximately 40 minutes after your QRF extracted you. We believe the courier is still in transit." Halstead looked at his hands on the table. "We have a window?" "A small one." Reyes was still. "How small?" 6 hours. After that, the courier reaches a crossing point and the document leaves our operational reach. "What are you asking?" Reyes said. "I'm not asking," Halstead said. "I'm informing. A second team is being assembled right now for a recovery operation. What I'm telling you and your people is that the situation you survived today is part of something larger, and that larger thing is not over." He looked around the room. "You're off the op. You've done your part. I want that to be absolutely clear." Reyes looked at him. "Chief Petty Officer," Halstead said, "you're off the op." "I heard you," Reyes said. But the way he said it was not the sound of a man accepting a statement. It was the sound of a man filing information. Halstead stood. "Get some rest. Medical food debrief paperwork. You're stood down." He looked at Sarah. "Specialist Mitchell, I'll be speaking to your chain of command about your actions today. The full picture of what you did out there is—" He stopped, and for a moment the careful military language seemed to not quite cover what he was trying to say. "It's not something we see often," he finished. "Not from any background." He left. The room held silence for about 5 seconds. Then Kowalski said, 32 people. No one answered that. Torres moved to the window, stood there with his back to the room. Finch was looking at the table. Okafor's bandaged hand rested flat in front of him, and he was staring at it as though the answer to something was written on the gauze. Sarah said, "The document is still in the valley." "Mitchell," Reyes said. 6 hours, she said, and a second team that doesn't have any context from the ground because they weren't there today. Mitchell, I know where the vehicle approaches are. I know the southern track. I know the western ridgeline. I know the distance and angle from the eastern outcrop. I spent 90 minutes building a picture of that ground, and I still have all of it. She looked at Reyes. The second team doesn't. Reyes looked at her for a very long time. "You were shot at today for 90 minutes, he said quietly. "I know that," she said. "You don't have to do anything else. What you did today is more than—" "I know what it's more than," Sarah said. Her voice was steady, and she was surprised that it was, and she let it be. "I'm not volunteering because I have something to prove. I'm volunteering because I have information that's useful, and 32 people are the reason it matters." She held his eyes. "You taught me today that useful is enough. You said it yourself on the helicopter going out. Sometimes knowing where the tourniquets are is enough." Reyes was quiet. Finch looked up from the table. "She's not wrong about the ground knowledge," he said. "She held that position longer than anyone. She's got the whole picture." "I'm aware," Reyes said. He looked at Sarah for another long moment, and she watched something move across his face. Not decision, not exactly, but the recognition of a direction that had already been chosen by the situation itself and was simply waiting to be acknowledged. "You need to eat more," he said, "and you need that shoulder looked at again. And you need 45 minutes of rest because what your body is running on right now is going to run out in the next hour, and you will not be useful to anyone when it does. Sarah understood what he was telling her. 45 minutes, she said. And Mitchell. He waited until she looked at him. This time you don't get to decide what role you play. If you go back out there, you follow orders. Every order. Without the logistics specialist's independent assessment of the tactical situation. She almost smiled. Almost. I make no promises about the assessments, she said, but I'll follow the orders. It was close enough for both of them. She stood. She walked to the door and she felt the weight of the rifle that was no longer in her hands, and she felt the weight of the name 32 people that Halstead had put in the room, and she felt the specific gravity of a day that was not finished with her yet. She had 45 minutes. She intended to use every one of them. She slept for 38 minutes. It wasn't good sleep. It was the kind of sleep that happens when a body overrides a mind that isn't ready to stop moving sudden and deep and without any of the normal transitions. She lay down on the cot in the small restroom off the medical unit, and the last thing she registered was the ceiling above her. And then there was nothing. And then Reyes was standing in the doorway saying her name in the same voice he used for everything, which was to say a voice that contained precisely the amount of urgency the situation required, and nothing more. She was on her feet before she was fully awake. 38 minutes, she said. Close enough, he said. We need to move. The second operation had been assembled with the compressed efficiency of people working against a clock they couldn't see, but could feel. The team was different this time. Two of Reyes's operators, Kowalski and Torres, had been cleared to go on the basis that they were the people with the most current ground knowledge. Finch had been pulled for a separate tasking, which he'd accepted with a look that told Sarah he wasn't happy about it, but understood the reason. Two operators from the QRF team, a pair named Vasquez and Cross, had been added to fill the numbers. They were good as Sarah could see that immediately they moved and communicated with the ease of people who had operated together long enough to not need to explain themselves to each other. The intelligence package for the second operation was thinner than Sarah would have liked. The drone feed had tracked a single vehicle, a covered truck, moving east through the valley for approximately 40 minutes before losing it in a section of the route where terrain features blocked aerial observation. The vehicle had not re-emerged from that section in the 90 minutes since. Either it had stopped, which meant the courier was waiting for something, or it had taken a secondary route that wasn't on the maps, which meant the maps were wrong. Sarah, looking at the satellite imagery spread on the planning table, said the southern track. Vasquez looked at her. He had the broad, angular face of someone who had grown up outdoors and the patient attention of someone who knew that information could come from unexpected places. What about it? When the RPG vehicle came up from the south this morning, it was moving fast, and it was on a track that doesn't show on the standard map. I tracked it in the scope for almost 30 seconds before I took the shot. The track runs parallel to the main valley road, but sits lower in the depression between the two ridge systems. It's not visible from aerial observation because of the ridge angle, and it's not on the map because it's not improved. It's probably just a route people have used long enough that it became a route. She looked at Reyes. He was looking at the imagery. If the courier knows that track exists, she continued, and someone who planned this morning's operation clearly knew it existed because they staged the RPG vehicle on it, then the drone losing the truck in the terrain section makes sense. The truck turned south, dropped into the depression, and it's been moving on the secondary track ever since. Cross, the other QRF operator, said, "That puts it. He studied the imagery coming out of the depression approximately here, which is about 4 kilometers from the crossing point Halstead mentioned. At truck speed on rough ground," Kowalski said, "that's maybe 25 minutes. We have less time than we thought," Torres said. Reyes was already moving to the door. "We're wheels up in 8 minutes. Mitchell, you're in the same capacity as this morning, non-combat rear of the aircraft. You are there for the ground knowledge and the supply management. Is that understood?" "Understood," she said. She picked up her bag. She did not write anything in her notebook. There was no system for this. There was only moving forward, and so she moved. The helicopter this time was smaller, faster, and did not have the comfortable illusion of a quiet flight. Everyone aboard understood what they were going into and why, and that understanding changed the character of the air inside the aircraft in a way that Sarah felt physically a density to the silence, a quality of attention that she recognized now as a thing she had not been able to name that morning but could name now. It was people who had made their decisions and were living inside those decisions, forward-facing without the noise of doubt. Torres sat across from her. His face was still the way faces get when they're conserving something. "You doing okay?" he asked her. "You know that's the third time someone has asked me that today," she said. "Third time's the truth," Torres said. She looked at him. "I don't feel afraid," she said. "I feel like I should feel afraid. I felt afraid this morning. But right now I just feel—" She searched for the word necessary. Torres thought about that. "That's better than afraid," he said. "Afraid makes you slow. Necessary makes you accurate." She held that. The flight was 14 minutes. The approach was low and fast and came from the northwest, which was the angle Reyes had chosen specifically to use the ridge system as noise cover from anyone watching the valley. When the helicopter set down, it was behind a rock formation, a kilometer north of where the secondary track should be, and the sound of the aircraft was gone within seconds of touchdown. The ground felt different at night. She'd known it would, she'd been told it would in the collective understanding of people who had been in places like this before. But knowing and feeling were different things, and what she felt when she stepped onto the desert floor in the dark was a fundamental shift in the information available to her. The scope that morning had been her primary tool. Without it, she was working on what she could hear and what the people around her communicated, and that was a different kind of operating. Reyes put her between Torres and Kowalski in the movement formation, which meant she was surrounded by the two people whose presence she had come to understand over the course of the day represented the highest available probability of her continued survival. She didn't find this arrangement insulting. She found it correct. They moved. The ground knowledge she had described in the planning room was real but imperfect. She had seen the terrain through a rifle scope from an elevated position in daylight. What she was navigating now was the same geography experienced entirely differently. But the distances she had memorized, the angles, the relationships between the ridge systems, those held. They were abstract enough to survive the translation from scope to foot. When Vasquez on point raised his fist to stop the formation, everyone stopped. Sarah stopped with them. She didn't breathe through her mouth. She waited. Vasquez signaled with two fingers pointing southeast, then held up one fist. One vehicle stationary. The courier had stopped. Reyes moved up beside Vasquez, and the two of them conducted a quick, nearly silent exchange of signals and gestures that Sarah couldn't fully interpret but understood in its general direction. They had found the truck. It was stopped. The reason it was stopped was information they didn't yet have, and they needed to get closer before they could form a plan. Cross moved wide to the right on, angling for a flanking view. Torres indicated to Sarah to go to ground and stay still, which she did without hesitation, settling onto the desert floor and holding herself flat and quiet. She was good at still. The stillness was something she had in her naturally, the same temperament that made her a methodical inventory specialist, made her capable of sustained patient immobility. She listened. For 2 minutes there was nothing except the desert, which was not actually silent, but merely quiet in ways that required adjustment. Wind moving over rock, the distant sound of her own pulse. Then from the southeast voices, two of them speaking in a language she didn't know, and the tone of the conversation told her more than the words would have. These were not frightened people, not people expecting trouble. These were people waiting, patiently, routinely waiting, the way you wait when you believe you are in a secure location with a timed appointment ahead of you. That meant a meeting point. That meant someone was coming to them. She was moving before she made the conscious decision to move low and controlled to where Reyes was crouched, and she put her mouth close to his ear and said very quietly, "They're waiting for a pickup. Someone is coming to them." Reyes looked at her. "The tone," she said. "They're not nervous. They're not in a hurry. They're waiting for an appointment." Reyes processed this in about 2 seconds. He touched Vasquez's arm and made a signal she didn't know, and Vasquez nodded and began moving to a wider position. Then Reyes pulled out his radio and communicated a short coded message to the aircraft that was holding position to the north. Then he looked at Sarah. "How confident?" he said, barely audible. "Very," she said. He nodded once. That was enough. The next 6 minutes were the tensest of the day, which was a remarkable thing given the context of the day. The team dispersed into positions around the stopped truck, moving with the patient, deliberate precision of people who understood that sound was now the primary enemy, and Sarah stayed flat against the ground in a position that gave her a clear sight line to the truck's rear, which was the direction any arriving vehicle would approach from. She heard the second vehicle before she saw anything. A low, steady sound moving carefully, the kind of sound a vehicle makes when the driver is trying not to make a sound. It came from the east, and it came slowly, and when it stopped, it was close enough that she could hear the engine idling. A door opened, one set of footsteps, purposeful, unhurried. Then Reyes moved and Vasquez moved and Cross moved, and the operation that followed happened in approximately 11 seconds and involved a great deal of shouting in multiple languages and a very bright light that someone on the team had brought specifically for this purpose. Sarah stayed in her position and watched the perimeter and held herself ready for the thing that didn't happen, which was a third vehicle or a runner or a response force that someone had staged nearby. None of those things happened. In the silence that followed the 11 seconds, she heard Reyes's voice controlled and clear. "We have 2 in custody. Vehicle is clean, except for a bag in the rear compartment." A pause. "Mitchell, I need you." She got up and walked to the truck. The bag was a canvas military-style satchel, worn at the corners with a locking closure that had been forced at some point and repaired with wire. Reyes held it out to her, not because she had any special intelligence expertise, but because she was the person who had spent the longest part of the day thinking about what was inside it and what it meant, and he trusted her to approach it correctly. She opened it. Inside was a manila envelope sealed with tape layered over the original closure, and inside the envelope, she could feel it through the material were papers, documents, the network map that Halstead had described, the names and locations of 32 people whose continued existence depended on that document not reaching its destination. She held it. She was aware that she was holding it with both hands carefully, the way you hold something that is fragile in a non-physical way. She was aware that the weight of it was nothing paper think tape, and that the weight of it was everything. "Got it," she said. "Confirmed," Reyes said. "Confirmed." She looked up at him. "We have to get this to Halstead immediately. If there are duplicates." "Already on it," Reyes said. "Vasquez, call it in. Tell them we have the package and we need an intelligence team at Extraction Point Alpha within the hour." The man who had arrived in the second vehicle, the courier she understood, was sitting on the ground with Cross behind him, and he was looking at Sarah with an expression she couldn't fully categorize. It wasn't fear and it wasn't anger. It was something closer to the look of a person recalculating, a person who had been operating on a set of assumptions that had just been comprehensively invalidated. She held the satchel and she looked back at him and she thought about the informant who was dead 11 kilometers from an extraction point, and she thought about the 72-hour surveillance report that had missed a prepared ambush position, and she thought about the 4 words Commander Raheel Mansour had spoken into a radio in the copper-colored early morning. She thought about all of it, and then she stopped thinking about it because the thinking was someone else's job and always had been, and her job right now was to hold this bag and not put it down until it was in the hands of the people whose job it was to protect what was inside it. The extraction went clean. 22 minutes from the moment Reyes called it in to the moment the helicopter lifted off, taking the 2 men in custody, the satchel, and everyone on the team with it. Sarah sat in the aircraft with the bag on her lap and Torres on one side and Kowalski on the other, and she did not speak, and neither did they, and the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of people who have finished something difficult and are not yet ready to discuss it. Then Kowalski said, "Second operation in 1 day. Not bad for logistics." Torres said, "Don't. I'm just saying." "I know what you're saying. Don't say it. Let her breathe." Sarah looked at Kowalski. "It's okay," she said. "Told you," Kowalski said to Torres. Torres looked at the ceiling of the aircraft in the manner of a man exercising great patience. Sarah almost smiled. She didn't quite get there, but she almost did, and for the first time since 4:30 that morning, almost was enough. FOB Kestrel came up below them, and the helicopter descended, and she watched it come up, the way she had watched it recede that morning, and she thought about the distance between those 2 moments, measured not in hours, but in everything that had happened inside them, and she felt it settle into her body as something permanent. Not a wound and not a trophy, something more like a watermark. The place a person reached and then carried with them invisibly for the rest of their life. Halstead was waiting on the landing pad. He was not alone. There were intelligence personnel with him, and a junior officer with a clipboard, and the civilian Walsh who had left the debrief room, and who now had the particular expression of someone who had received information in the intervening hours that had significantly altered her assessment of the situation. But Halstead was the one at the front, and when Sarah stepped off the helicopter with the satchel, he walked directly to her. She held the bag out to him. He took it. He looked at the sealed envelope inside. His face did something complicated and brief the way faces do when a person is processing both relief and the specific weight of what the relief is actually about. Then he looked at Sarah. 32 people, he said. Yes, sir, she said. He held her gaze for a long moment. You're going to have to answer a great many questions over the next few days, Specialist Mitchell, from people at levels considerably above this installation. There will be reports and reviews and formal commendations and probably a few conversations that will be uncomfortable. He paused. I want you to know before any of that starts that what you did today, both operations, is the kind of thing that doesn't have a clean category. There's no box on any form that covers it accurately. I was useful, Sarah said, that's all. Halstead looked at her with an expression she had not seen on a colonel's face before. It was something between respect and something she could only describe as the look of a person encountering an honest answer in a context that doesn't usually produce them. Go eat, he said. Sleep. All of it this time, not 38 minutes. He glanced at Reyes, who had come to stand beside her. Make sure she does. Reyes said, yes, sir. Halstead walked away with the satchel, and Walsh fell into step beside him, and the intelligence personnel closed around them like water filling a space, and within a minute, they were gone, inside the operations building, and Sarah was standing on the landing pad in the cool night air, with Reyes beside her, and the sounds of the base around her, ordinary and permanent, and entirely indifferent to everything that had happened in the 12 hours since she had last stood on solid ground. Her shoulder ached. Her eye, the one she had held to the scope for 90 minutes, had a persistent, dull soreness behind it that the medic's wrap hadn't touched. Her boots were worse than they had been that morning, which she would not have believed possible. She looked at Reyes. What happens now? Now we find out who inside the chain leaked the operational timeline, he said. That's Halstead's problem, and Walsh's problem, and probably a dozen other people's problem. Not ours. And the team? Reyes looked at her with a directness that contained something she hadn't seen from him all day, something slightly less armored than his usual presentation. Torres is going to eat an enormous amount of food and sleep for approximately 12 hours. Kowalski will spend an hour cleaning his weapon and then do the same. Okafor gets his hand properly treated. He paused. Thompson is going to be fine. The wound was clean. He'll be evaluated for return to duty in 6 weeks. I'm glad, she said. And she meant it in a way that was difficult to contain in 2 words, but was the only 2 words available. He wanted me to tell you something, Reyes said. She looked at him. He said, Reyes paused as though testing the sentence before delivering it. He said to tell you that the shot on the truck was the hardest shot he's seen anyone take in 3 deployments. Moving target distance angle. He said he wasn't sure he could have made it himself. Sarah absorbed that. He was coaching me from 6 inches away, she said. He made it. That's not what he said, Reyes told her, and I think you know that. She looked at the ground for a moment. The desert floor of FOB Kestrel, pale and pressed flat by years of foot traffic and machinery, the most ordinary surface in the world. She thought about what Thompson had said in the sniper position. You don't aim at where they are, you aim at where they're going to be. She thought about how that statement, delivered as pure technical instruction, had turned out to be about more than shooting. Reyes, she said, Mitchell, when the questions start, when Halstead's people and the intelligence people and whoever else wants to talk about what happened today, what do I tell them about the decision to take the sniper position, about going back out for the second operation? She looked at him. What's the right answer? Reyes thought about this for a moment with the seriousness it deserved. Tell them the truth, he said finally. Tell them you looked at the situation and you saw what was needed and you did it. There's no more complicated answer than that. People are going to have opinions about a logistics specialist doing what I did today, she said. People have opinions about everything, Reyes said. The 32 people in that network don't care about the opinions. Thompson doesn't care about the opinions. I don't care about the opinions. He looked at her steadily. Do you care about the opinions? She thought about it honestly. Not tonight, she said. Then we're fine, he said. She nodded. She turned toward the medical unit and the rest that waited inside it, and she felt the full accumulated weight of the day distribute itself across her body in a wave that was so complete and so thorough that she was surprised she remained standing. But she remained standing because that was what her body had learned to do today, to remain standing after the thing it had just absorbed, to take the next step to move toward the next necessary thing. Behind her, Reyes said, "Mitchell." She stopped, turned back. He was looking at her the way he had looked at her at the sniper position before she ran across 20 open meters of desert ground. That look that wasn't a question, but contained everything a question would have asked. "You know that what you're," he said, "is not the same as what you were this morning." She held his eyes. "I know," she said. "Okay," he said, and she knew by now what he meant when he said it that way. She turned back around and she walked toward the light of the medical unit, and she did not look behind her again, because everything behind her was already decided, and what lay in front of her was the thing she hadn't looked at yet. The morning after the questions, the forms, the conversations at levels above this installation, and somewhere on the other side of all of that, a choice that Colonel Halstead had not yet formally offered, but that she already felt the shape of the way you feel the shape of a door in the dark before your hand finds the handle. She pushed through the medical unit door. She sat down. She let the medic check her shoulder a second time. She ate the food someone put in front of her, all of it, without tasting it. And then she went back to the cot and she lay down, and this time the sleep came differently, not as an override but as an arrival, the way sleep comes when a person has genuinely finished something and their body knows it and their mind for once agrees. She did not dream. Or if she did not remember the dreams when Reyes came to the door in the morning. She was already awake when he got there. Reyes was holding 2 cups of coffee when he arrived at the medical unit door, which was the first surprise of the morning. He was not a man who carried things for other people as a gesture. He was a man who carried things because they needed carrying. So when he held one of the cups out to her, without a word, she understood it as something more than coffee and took it accordingly. "Halstead wants us at 0700, he said. She looked at the clock on the wall. 40 minutes. What's the meeting? He didn't say. Reyes leaned against the door frame and drank from his cup. "But Walsh is going to be there, and 2 people flew in from Bagram overnight, which means whatever Halstead is about to say has already been approved by people above Halstead." Sarah drank the coffee. It was better than the coffee she made herself, which was saying something, because she made very good coffee. She thought about what it meant that 2 people had flown overnight from Bagram, which was the kind of movement that didn't happen for routine debriefs. It happened when someone had decided that something was significant enough to require a physical presence rather than a secure phone call. "The leak," she said. Reyes looked at her over the rim of his cup. "They found the leak," she said. "That's what this is." He didn't confirm it and he didn't deny it, and in her experience of the past 24 hours, that meant she was right. She finished the coffee. She put on her uniform. She checked her notebook out of habit, found the 3 words from yesterday's page, "survive, be useful." "Come home," and she looked at them for a moment before closing the notebook and putting it back in her pocket. She had done all 3. The page felt finished. The operations building at OHOI 700 was a different atmosphere from the debrief room the day before. The debrief had felt like an accounting, people listing what happened, putting it into a form that could be filed. This felt like a verdict. The same table, but the people around it had a different weight to their presence, a compressed quality, the way a room feels when the people inside it know something the hallway outside doesn't. Halstead was at the head of the table. Walsh was to his right, and she had the look of someone who had not slept but had used the sleepless hours productively. The 2 people from Bagram were a man and a woman who introduced themselves with first names only Raymond and Claire, in the practiced way of people for whom last names in professional settings are a security consideration rather than a social norm. Reyes sat beside Sarah. Kowalski and Torres were at the end of the table. Okafor was there, his hand freshly wrapped. Finch came in 2 minutes late, slightly out of breath, and sat down with the expression of someone who had been running and was not going to explain why. Halstead looked at the table. "The document recovered last night has been authenticated," he said. "It is the original. There are no confirmed duplicates. The network is intact." He let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. 32 people who went to sleep last night, not knowing how close the situation came, are still operational. That is directly attributable to the actions of this team, both operations. Nobody said anything. It wasn't the kind of statement that invited response. Raymond from Bagram leaned forward. He had the kind of face that gave away nothing voluntarily, but compensated by listening with unusual completeness. The intelligence compromise, he said. We've completed an initial assessment. The operational timeline for Steel Thunder was accessed by 7 people at the planning level. Of those 7, one individual made an unauthorized copy of the timeline document and transmitted a summary to an external contact 48 hours before the operation launched. The room absorbed that. Sarah felt it land in her differently than she expected. She had suspected it, she had said it out loud from the sniper position. She had asked Reyes directly, she had watched the shape of it clarify over the course of the day before. But suspecting and knowing are different countries, and the distance between them, when you cross it, always turns out to be longer than it looked. Who? Reyes said. His voice was flat in a specific way she had learned to read the flatness of a man controlling something strong. Raymond looked at Halstead. Halstead nodded. Captain Jerome Aldous, Raymond said. S2 planning staff. He is currently in custody. Reyes was still for a full 3 seconds. Then he said, I know Aldous. I know, Halstead said. He was at the operational briefing for Steel Thunder. He knew the flight path, the timing, the team composition. Reyes's voice had not changed volume or pace, but something in it had shifted, becoming more precise in the way that precision becomes a form of pressure. He knew we had a logistics specialist aboard because of the helicopter failure. He knew everything. Yes, Halstead said. He did. Why, Reyes said. Raymond and Claire exchanged a look that communicated something Sarah couldn't read, but recognized as the look of people who know more than they're about to say. That question is part of an ongoing investigation, Raymond said. What I can tell you is that this was not ideological. The assessment is financial motivation. Aldous had debts, and someone identified those debts and used them. Torres, who had not spoken since the meeting started, said in a very quiet voice, he sold us for money. Nobody answered that. It had the quality of a statement that didn't need an answer and wouldn't be improved by one. Finch was looking at the table. His jaw was tight. He was 23 years old, and he was processing the information that a man he had presumably trusted had decided that the lives of the people he flew beside were worth a financial transaction, and Sarah watched that processing happen across his face with a directness that he wasn't quite experienced enough yet to fully conceal. She understood the feeling completely. She just wore it differently. There's something else, Walsh said. The quality of attention in the room shifted. Walsh set a folder on the table. She didn't open it. She kept her hands flat on the cover and looked around the room with the precise, unhurried look of someone who has organized what she needs to say and is delivering it in the correct sequence. The informant, she said, the man we were attempting to extract. His name was Karimi. He had been operational for 4 years, and the intelligence he provided over that period was responsible for disrupting 11 planned attacks, 3 weapons shipments, and 2 recruitment pipelines. She paused. He had a wife and 2 children. He had requested relocation for his family as part of the extraction agreement. The relocation had been approved and was pending the completion of the operation. Sarah looked at the folder on the table. She didn't look away from it. His family has been located, Walsh continued. They are safe. They were moved by Karimi himself 2 days before his last contact with his handler. He suspected something was wrong. He didn't know what, but he moved his family to a secondary location before he lost communications. Walsh looked at her hands on the folder. He protected them before he was taken. He used his last operational window to get his children out. The silence this time was different from all the previous silences in all the previous rooms. It was the silence of people confronting a human thing, a man in an impossible position, making the one move that remained available to him, choosing what to protect when he could no longer protect everything. Sarah felt the back of her throat tighten. She didn't speak. She breathed carefully. Reyes said, "Where is the family now?" "Being processed through a secure relocation pipeline," Walsh said. "They will be resettled. It will take time, but the commitment stands." "Good," Reyes said. It was a small word for everything it had to carry, but he delivered it with enough weight that it held. Halstead looked at Sarah. She felt the look before she fully registered it, the way you feel a change in air pressure before you hear the sound it carries. She looked back at him and waited. "Specialist Mitchell," he said, "there are several things I need to say to you directly, and I want you to hear all of them before you respond to any of them." "Yes, sir," she said. Your actions over the course of the past 24 hours are being formally documented for commendation review. The Bronze Star has been submitted. That process will take its own time and follow its own path, and I'm not going to pretend the path is short or simple, because it isn't. But the submission is real and the justification is unambiguous. He folded his hands on the table. What you did at the sniper position without qualification, without training sufficient to the task under sustained enemy fire, holding a position alone to protect a team of operators, that is not a thing we have a clean category for. You already know that. I told you that last night. You did, she said. What I didn't tell you last night, Halstead continued, is that Raymond and Claire are here not only because of the intelligence failure, they're here because of you specifically. Sarah looked at Raymond. Raymond leaned forward again. We are part of a joint assessment program that identifies and evaluates individuals who demonstrate exceptional performance under combat conditions outside their designated roles. This program exists because the nature of modern operations regularly places non-combat personnel in situations that require capabilities well beyond their training, and the military's response to those situations has historically been inadequate. He paused. We've been running this program for 3 years. We've identified 11 individuals in that time who met the evaluation threshold. You are the 12th. The room was very still. What does that mean practically? Sarah asked. She had learned from Reyes the value of practical questions. It means you are being offered a formal pathway to Special Operations Support qualification, Raymond said. A training pipeline specifically designed for individuals with your profile high-competency non-combat specialists who have demonstrated the capacity to perform under extreme conditions. It is not combat training in the traditional sense. It is something more specific than that. People who complete it are embedded with special operations teams in an enhanced support capacity that reflects their actual demonstrated capabilities, not their job title. Sarah absorbed that. Enhanced support capacities, she said. You would be the person you already proved you can be, Claire said, speaking for the first time. She had a direct, careful voice that made Sarah think of Walsh, but warmer. With actual training and a structure that fits the reality, instead of a logistics specialist who happens to hold a sniper position under fire, you would be someone prepared for every version of what yesterday presented. The words settled into her the way important things settle, not all at once, but in layers, each one carrying different implications that needed space to arrange themselves. She thought about Clarksville, Tennessee, about her mother saying it was a gift, about Marcus saying she'd end up running a corporation or joining the military because those were the places where obsessive organization was celebrated. She thought about the notebook in her breast pocket, the color-coded tabs from construction paper, the system for everything. She thought about the rifle on the rock beside Thompson, which she had set down carefully because it wasn't hers, because it would always be his. She thought about 20 meters of open desert ground covered low and fast without stopping. She thought about 32 names on a piece of paper in a canvas satchel and a man named Karimi who had moved his children before he lost the ability to move anything. She thought about 4 words she had written at the top of a page in a notebook at 4:30 in the morning: survive, be useful, come home. She had done all 3. Can I ask a question? She said. Of course, Raymond said. She looked at Reyes. You knew, she said, when you came to the depot yesterday morning, when you asked me to come on the operation. You knew that the helicopter failure was real, but you also knew something about me that made my name come to you specifically. Reyes looked at her without flinching. I knew your service record, he said. I knew your performance evaluations. I knew you had taken the rifle familiarization when it was offered, which most logistics personnel don't bother with. I knew you had requested advanced trauma aid certification 3 times and been denied 3 times because it wasn't in your designated training pathway. He paused. I knew you were someone who kept trying to be more prepared than your job required. And you thought that was relevant to bringing me on a SEAL operation. I thought, Reyes said carefully, that if something went wrong, the person I wanted in that helicopter was someone who was always trying to be more prepared than the situation demanded. He held her gaze. I didn't know how right I was. I want to be honest about that. What happened yesterday was beyond anything I anticipated when I walked into your depot. She looked at him for a moment, then she looked at Halstead, then at Raymond and Claire. What's the timeline on the decision, she asked. You have 72 hours to give us a formal answer, Raymond said, but there's no pressure beyond the window. If the answer is no, your record stands exactly as it is, the commendation proceeds, and you return to your logistics role with the full recognition of everything you did. There is no wrong answer. There is a harder answer and an easier answer, Claire added, but no wrong one, Finch said from the end of the table in a voice that was trying to sound casual and not entirely succeeding. For what it's worth, I'd vote yes, not that it's my vote. Kowalski said, nobody asked you, Finch. I'm offering perspective. You're offering opinions. Different thing. Torres looked at the ceiling. Sarah almost laughed. The situation wasn't quite there yet, but she almost did, and the almost was real, and it pushed through the weight of the room like a small and necessary light. She looked at Halstead. I don't need 72 hours, she said. The room went quiet. Mitchell, Reyes said carefully. I know what I'm doing, she said. She looked at him directly, and she let him see that she did, and she watched the thing in his expression that moved when he accepted what he was seeing. She looked back at Halstead and Raymond and Claire. I have one condition, she said. One thing I need before I give you the formal answer. Raymond said, what condition? I want to see Thompson first. Halstead looked at her for a moment. Then he said to the room, give us a minute. People moved. Chairs shifted. The room emptied of everyone except Halstead, Reyes, and Sarah. Halstead looked at her with the expression she had seen from him twice before, the expression of a man encountering an honest thing in a place that usually produced polished things. Why Thompson, he asked. Because he was the one who talked me through it, she said. Every shot, every adjustment. He coached me from 6 inches away with a wound in his side, and he did it because it was and he never asked for anything from me except that I listen and do exactly what he said. She looked at Halstead. Before I tell you what I'm going to do next with my life, I need to look at him and know that he's actually okay. Not the medical report. Him. Halstead was quiet for a moment. Then he said, he's in building 7. He was asking about you this morning. What was he asking? He wanted to know if you'd been offered a pathway. Halstead held her gaze. I told him I couldn't discuss personnel matters. He said, and I am quoting directly, that if we didn't offer you a pathway, we were idiots, and that the shot you made on the RPG truck was the cleanest moving target acquisition he'd seen from an untrained shooter in 15 years of service. Halstead paused. He is not a man who gives compliments carelessly. No, Sarah said, he isn't. She stood. Rhea stood with her. They walked out of the operations building together into the morning air, which was cool in the particular way of desert mornings, before the heat arrived, and they walked across the base toward Building 7 without speaking for most of the distance. Then Reyes said, You've already decided. I decided last night, she said. I decided when I was lying on the cot before I fell asleep. I just wanted to hear the formal version before I gave the formal answer. And Thompson, I genuinely need to see that he's okay, she said. That part was true. They reached Building 7. She pushed through the door. Thompson was sitting up in the medical bed, which was exactly what she expected, because Thompson was not a man who stayed horizontal when he could be vertical. His left side was wrapped beneath the medical gown, and he was holding a cup of something with his right hand, and he was looking at the door when she came through it, as though he had been expecting her at approximately this time. Mitchell, he said. Thompson, she said. He looked at her with the same assessment he applied to everything, complete unhurried landing on conclusions without announcing them. You look like someone who slept, he said. I slept, she said. How's the side? It's a side, he said. I've had worse. You said that yesterday? It was true yesterday. It's still true today. He set down the cup. Did they offer you the pathway? They did. Are you taking it? She looked at him. She thought about the weight of the rifle in her hands the first time, how she had expected it to feel different from what it was, familiar in an unfamiliar way, like a language you've never spoken that somehow sits correctly in your mouth. She thought about the scope and the crosshairs and the way the world through that lens was so precise and so narrow and so demanding of complete attention that everything else ceased to exist. She thought about what he had said to her in the position, the thing that had stayed with her through both operations and the overnight sleep and the morning meeting. You don't aim at where they are, you aim at where they're going to be. Yes, she said. Thompson nodded once. Slowly, the way he did everything. Good, he said. You told Halstead we'd be idiots not to offer it. I told him you'd be an idiot not to take it, he corrected. Different statement. She almost argued with that, and then she looked at him and understood that the difference between the two statements was something he had considered carefully before making, and she let it stand. When you're cleared, she said, and when I've gone through whatever this pipeline is, you want to work together, he said. I want to be trained by someone who knows what they're doing, she said. And I trust the person who talked me through 11 shots from 6 inches away with a hole in his side. Thompson considered this with the seriousness it deserved, which was the seriousness he applied to every real thing. The pipeline takes 8 months, he said. I'll be back on active status in 6 weeks. There's a 2-month gap there where I will have nothing to do except wait and be irritated about waiting. He looked at her steadily. If Command agrees to the arrangement, I'll work with you. Then I'll make sure Command agrees, she said. He almost smiled. Almost. It arrived on his face and left quickly, the way it always did, like weather passing. You're going to be difficult to work with, aren't you? I have a system for everything, she said. That's what I'm afraid of. She looked at him for a moment longer. She looked at the wound wrapped beneath the gown, and she thought about the ground between the helicopter and the sniper position. 20 meters of open desert that she had crossed because there was no better option, and because the math required it, and she thought about Thompson's voice in her ear, slow and patient, and stripped of everything decorative, giving her the tools she needed to do something she had never been prepared to do. She thought about what it meant to be prepared. Thank you, she said. Simple. 2 words. Thompson looked at her. You did the work, he said. You gave me the framework. The framework was already in you, he said. I just told you where to look. She held that. She let it settle the way the important things settled, slowly and in layers. Then she nodded. She walked to the door. Mitchell, Thompson said. She stopped. The Bronze Star, he said. Don't let them rush it. Make sure the documentation is complete. The citation needs to include both operations, not just the sniper position. The second operation is part of the story, and it matters to the record. She looked at him, a logistics specialist's instinct delivered in sniper's language. I'll make sure, she said. I know you will, he said. You have a system for everything. She left the building. Reyes was waiting outside. He looked at her face and he read it the way he read every tactical situation, completely accurately without asking unnecessary questions. Building 4, he said. Raymond and Claire are waiting. They walked together and she felt the morning air on her face, and she thought about Clarksville and Marcus and the color-coded notebooks. And she thought about the notebook in her breast pocket right now, and she thought about what she would write at the top of tomorrow's page. Not a list of tasks, not 3 things to accomplish. Something else. Something that was less a plan and more a direction, the kind of notation that doesn't tell you what to do, but reminds you of who you are while you're doing it. She pushed through the door of Building 4. Raymond and Claire looked up from the table. Halstead looked up from the table. Walsh looked up. Sarah Mitchell stood in the doorway of a room full of people waiting for her answer, and she felt the full weight of the previous 24 hours align behind her, like a force with direction. The crash, the scope, the rifle, the desert, Thompson's voice. 32. Names: a man named Karimi, who moved his children to safety before he ran out of time. 2 operations in 1 day, 38 minutes of sleep, and then back into the dark without hesitation. The truck in the scope, the moving target, the shot that landed. All of it behind her, pointed forward. She stepped into the room and she let the door close behind her. Yes, she said. No qualification, no condition, no system to explain it. Just the word delivered with the full weight of a person who had spent 24 hours discovering the exact shape of what she was capable of, and who had decided with the same quiet certainty she brought to every manifest she'd ever filed, and every crate she'd ever tracked, and every situation she'd ever walked into with her notebook and her plan, that the shape of it was worth everything it was going to cost. The girl who had counted bullets was gone. What stood in that room was the person who had saved the people who fired them, and she was just getting started.